In 1949, on March 31st, the official Confederation of Newfoundland with Canada took place. Is there a timeline where Newfoundland exists as the 49th state of the USA? Maybe. Newfoundland joining Confederation is still in the living memory of many Newfoundlanders. My parents were both born in Canada, but I have a couple of uncles who were born in the colony. That is to say, all of this might seem like ancient history, but it's really not. Alaska and Hawaii were granted statehood 10 years after Newfoundland joined Confederation. I'm no expert on the history of those two states, but I'm pretty well versed on Newfoundland's history. And I really believe that it was inevitable that Newfoundland would cease to exist as an independent nation in the reality that was the North American continent in the 20th century. We joined Canada, as we know. But Canada didn't want us. Britain took back control over Newfoundland in 1933, but they didn't want us either. They were just scared to death of the USA swallowing us up. So they put pressure on Canada to bring us into their fold. Were we ever really close to joining the United States, though? On one hand, no, we weren't. Washington was never really interested in bringing Newfoundland into the fold either, and to my knowledge, there were never any serious talks toward this end. But then again, like I said, Canada wasn't interested either. There was some polite interest during the initial Charlottetown Conference in 1864, but Newfoundland never actually participated in that one. I have seen it written that the invitation to attend arrived too late for a delegation to prepare to travel. But I've also seen that Newfoundland was simply just not interested in attending. Newfoundland did attend the Quebec conference a few years later, but the representatives were really just observers with no power to actually negotiate or make any decisions. And from all accounts, that worked just fine for everyone. In the 1890s, Newfoundland and the United States were working pretty nicely together, but there was no thought of Newfoundland joining the USA. It was just like a business arrangement, and one that worked well for everyone. Well, it didn't work for Canada. Don't forget, this was about 50 years before Newfoundland joined Confederation. Newfoundland still had to answer to Britain, and the British government decided to side with Canada on any skirmishes, and they put a stop to the working arrangement between the US and Newfoundland. Later in that same decade, and you might not believe me when I say this, but Newfoundland's economy and overall financial situation was in a pretty bad spot. Confederation would come up from time to time, but Canada just wasn't interested. And at this point in time, who could really blame them? In the early years of the 20th century, Newfoundland tried to do business with the USA again, and again, the plan failed. This time it wasn't Britain or Canada that got in the way, it was just a negotiation that resulted in a stalemate between the Americans and the Newfoundlanders. Still, they tried. The First World War arrived, and Newfoundland literally fed a generation of its young men and boys into the mouth of hell in service to the good old King of England. The King showed his thanks and appreciation by allowing us to foot our own bill for the war effort with no relief. This, in conjunction with some very bad years in the fishery and some absolutely unbelievable corruption by our political leaders, brought us to the Great Depression, where the bottom just dropped right out of her. By the 1930s, we were a problem that England just didn't want to deal with anymore. The wealth generated by the fishery had been shipped back to Devon and Dorset for centuries, with next to no investment in the land that was used to split and dry the bounty of the ocean, and make all this wealth a reality in the first place. The poor mother's sons that were fed into the buzzsaw at Beaumont Hamel, for no reason that will ever make sense to any human being who possesses a heart, were the definition of cannon fodder, utterly expendable souls in service to selfish elites who are today immortalized as sirs and lords. And this land that produced these soldiers had just become a headache to people who already possessed too much. When the Second World War came around, though, things were looking different. Newfoundland was strategically positioned on the globe to prove very valuable for the defense of North America. We were still under the dictatorship that was the Commission of Government, but we could see some light at the end of the tunnel. The Americans and the Canadians had set up military outposts all around Newfoundland and Labrador. Gander was about to become the crossroads of the world because of its important airport. We were able to really see ourselves as a significant landmark on the map. The country was prospering and the time was drawing near for the dictatorship to end and for us to determine our future again. This scared the British even more than the reciprocity negotiation former Prime Minister Robert Bond was working on around the turn of the century. The Americans saw real value in Newfoundland now, so the British jumped into action to ensure that we never became a state. The story of Joey and his drive toward Confederation is fairly well known by now. So I'll just say here that he signed the agreement to join Confederation after a 2-round referendum. And a minute before midnight on March 31st, 1949, Newfoundland officially joined Canada. This is where the what-ifs come into play. There was the Economic Union Party that never gained too much traction. But this was a group that argued for Newfoundland to maintain its independence and develop stronger economic ties with the US. They weren't outright saying we should join the US, but if a return to independence actually won in the referendum, I do kind of wonder how this might have played out over time. I'm going to say that I'm happy with how things turned out. A lot of good has come to my life personally because Newfoundland joined forces with Canada. I'm proud to be on this side of the madness that we're living through right now. I do believe that maintaining independence was a pipe dream and that joining either Confederation or statehood was inevitable. The forces that pushed us into Confederation did so for their benefit, not ours. But I think we have benefited greatly by joining Canada. It has not been perfect by any stretch, but I can't imagine that it would have been much better to have joined our neighbors to the south. So how close were we to actually becoming the 49th, 50th, or even 51st state? I don't think we were ever very close, but we'll never know now. And I'm just fine with that.